Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you those extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into, to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm going to start with a bit of unsubstantiated rumour, so that's the big warning. Please don't take this as definitely having happened. So we must be careful in this information space. But rumour has it, Rusint, Rumint, isn't it? Rumor intelligence has it that General Surovikin has been arrested. He knew about Prigozhin's rebellion. So I reported this morning in the news video that the US provided the claim that Surovikin knew about Prigozhin's mutiny before it happened ahead of time, and the Russian, MOD in general and the Russian government didn't know about it. And the idea was that the US were throwing this out there to put a cat amongst the pigeons, just sowing a bit of discord by leaking this information. Well, what a reward they're getting on their investment there. So if Surovikin has been arrested, that is huge because he is one of the only kind of vaguely competent military figures in the command structure. When he was in charge of the Ukrainian forces, yes, he was more defensively minded, but he did some pretty horrific stuff to the Ukrainians. But if you're talking about stabilizing the Russian forces, doing a successful operation withdrawal from Kherson, so starting to build the Surovikin line, the defenses, he did a pretty good job. And he was just a lot more competent than other Russian generals and whatnot. Well, if he's been arrested, that is a real issue, and it shows further cracks in the Russian war project. It shows that he was really a bit of an ally of Prigozhin, as has been said before, and that rift between Prigozhin and Wagner and the rest of the Russian MOD and the government is indeed a chasm. So that's really fascinating if that's happened, but it might not have happened. So please do take that with a pinch of salt. We're going to look into a few bits and pieces. I'm going to go first of all, actually, we're going to look at the Kramatorsk hit that took place over the last 24 hours yesterday that injured a whole number of people and has killed something like 8, including 3 children. 2 Dutch people experienced a rocket attack. So JR, who helps me with my maps, legend, big shout out to JR. Jerome is a good man. So he said, look, being Dutch, so this is a Google translation of a Dutch article. Anyway, there were 2 Dutch people who were injured, and these guys provide assistance. They're doing humanitarian work or charitable work in the area. According to eyewitnesses, 2 rockets landed in the center of the city, one of which hit restaurant Rear Lounge, a popular downtown location. Frankie van Hinten and Koen van Oosten, who are in Kramatorsk because they bake free fries for Ukrainians in their chip cart, were eating in Rear Lounge at the time. The explosion in Kramatorsk also damaged one of the 2 cars driven by the Dutch fries bakers, Van Hinten and Van Oosten. At least we're not going to bake on Wednesday. Van Hinten doesn't know what they'll do next. We often hear impacts near where we bake fries. I think it just makes me more determined. So they are injured, and I think they're going back to Holland, but then they're going to, once their vehicles have been repaired, they're going to get back on in the saddle, so to speak. But yeah, this is what they do. I think this is a Dutch article about them, but I'll leave these links in the description just in case you want to donate to the work that they do. I think here you can see the donations that they are taking. So that's good stuff. It's great that they are doing the work they do. Anyway, let's go and look at certain elements to do with the counteroffensive. First of all, we're going to look at mines, a thread by Tatarigami on mines. In light of the ongoing discussions surrounding the counteroffensive, we need to revisit the topic of mines due to its utmost importance. As I have previously emphasized, the extensive deployment of mines by Russian forces remains a significant threat to our troops. The mine problem encountered in this counteroffensive would pose a formidable challenge even for NATO or Western militaries if given the same resources. With thousands of heavily mined square kilometers, it is a complex and protracted issue that cannot be easily resolved. He says, providing us with more anti-mine means would improve the situation, but it doesn't solve all the challenges. Russians use various methods to lay mines, including manual, mechanized, and remote approaches, adding complexity as different types of mines require various clearance. While the possibility of bombarding the mined areas to create safe passages theoretically exists, it would necessitate an extensive quantity of ammunition and resources that Ukraine currently lacks and realistically cannot acquire to clear dozens of kilometers that way. And we'll see this in action in a little while. What about mine plows? While this option may appear viable, it is vulnerable to ATGM fire or loitering munitions, effectively blocking the passage and exposing personnel to potential artillery engagements as they struggle to retreat or dislodge the stuck vehicle. So mine plows also can, I think, be vulnerable to the mines themselves. Like the plows don't last forever, and there are different types of mines, of course, as well. And the vehicles themselves are, then they don't just they're not able to be used to clear mines ad infinitum and just like, yeah, shove in a plow, clear those mines, job done. You have to replace the plows, and quite often the vehicles get damaged, as far as I understand it anyway. Does the use of mine clearing line charges prove effective? Yes, it does. However, crucial caveats to consider: a single M58 or UR77 charge clears only a relatively small area, whereas our objective is to address areas kilometers in depth, not merely meters. In previous wars, it was easier to approach the enemy at close proximity without being easily detected. However, the element of surprise has diminished significantly due to the constant presence of drones, which easily detect any approaching mine clearing vehicles. While the ultimate goal is to suppress the enemy before the mine clearing vehicles arrive, it remains a difficult challenge to contend with. Covert and mobile ATGM teams, helicopters, and loitering munitions that cannot be easily neutralized. This necessitates an extraordinary level of coordination among anti-air defense, electronic warfare units, sappers, engineers, artillery, and reconnaissance elements on a scale not encountered by many modern armies in recent large-scale operations. I'd say by any modern armies, really, not on this scale. The choking effect of mines is often overlooked, but significantly hampers maneuverability in battle. Even after minefields are supposedly cleared, residual mines create lingering doubts, discouraging swift movements and maneuvers by military units. Don't forget, you've also got, and this happened in Vuhledar with the Ukrainians, that the Russians would maybe clear mines and then get stuck and go and do an attack or whatever. And actually, the Ukrainians would have launched in that time more mines, these ram systems or whatever, dropping mines by sending up artillery shells that explode and the mines come down. As the Russians are out doing their sort of battle or getting blown up on other mines, then they go to retreat or get out of there, and they hit minefields that weren't there when they attacked. So these kind of situations make it particularly difficult for offensive armies. In conclusion, it is crucial to acknowledge the gravity of this issue and allocate the requisite resources to bolster Ukraine's anti-mine capabilities. To overcome it, we must prioritize the development of innovative solutions and foster exceptional unit cooperation. Absolutely, and these mine situations are mines are a real thorn in the side for Ukrainians. Now, this is supposedly a textbook assault, right? So some footage come out. Ukrainian drones recorded a successful textbook mechanized assault near Bakhmut by the 28th Brigade. Line charges clear lanes through minefields. BMP-2 infantry vehicles roll down the lanes towards the enemy position and suppress enemy infantry. Then dismount to clear the position and hold it. Okay, we won't look at all of this. It's a 3-minute video. It is worth dipping into. Um, I don't know if it's got. Yeah, it's got music. I'm going to turn the sound off. What Tatarugami was just saying was talking about clearing minefields. That it can be done. Here's an example of how it can be done. But this is one position. This is just one tree line and near Bakhmut, and you've got the entire like Zaporizhia, Donetsk front lines, and then you've got Luhansk. How many mine clearing charges would you need? How many mine plows to really successfully get through all the minefields you need to find those safe passages in your offensive maneuvers? It's just quite incredible. And here's a great example. So the Russians are in their positions, trench lines in the trees, so on and so forth. You are you have the first of all, this vehicle needs to get close enough to the opposition without getting taken out. So you can see artillery going off in the background. So Ukraine are evidently hammering positions. Then the mine charges go off. That creates a passageway through there, but you still got that field first of all to get through. And that mine clearing vehicle is susceptible. Now it's just, I guess, lucky that none of the Russian troops there in this tree line have any ATGMs and aren't spotting for artillery. This mine clearing vehicle is able to do its job, but so often we see mine clearing vehicles getting hit in the Orikhiv area and Zaporizhia because they are really vulnerable. What's interesting here as well is it throws the mine clearing charges here right in the middle of the field, and actually the vehicles come down the side. Now, I have a feeling that these mine clearing charges, although they blow up, you see these shockwave. We'll show that again. It's a shockwave that's important because with pressure mines, the shockwave is designed to blow up the mines. Now, I don't know if there are mines like, is that a little mine there that's going off? We'll watch that again. Sorry to keep playing the same thing, but I don't know if you've got maybe a couple of mines going off in that area, but it could just be that actually that field didn't have that many mines in or whatever. But the idea would be that those explosions and the shockwaves clear out the mines much further from where the actual charges are thrown. So as we can see, these vehicles are going down the side of the field, and you've seen that the mine charges line exploded here, right? That's where the main explosion was, but they're driving down there. So I guess the understanding is that would have done its job for pressure mines in that whole area, and therefore you don't have to drive down the middle of that strip. Is my understanding. So these guys then drive down the edge here, but you can see there are munitions being fired. I don't know what's going on there, where that came from. These are using suppressive fire to take out the tree lines and keep the Russians hemmed in, and then they release smoke, these guys. So you see that happening. I don't know if they already have. I mean, there's quite a lot of smoke around, which is something actually we haven't seen the Russians do too much. There was a complaint recently from a pro-Russian mill blogger saying, why are we not using smoke? The Ukrainians are using smoke, which is kind of like the basics of doing warfare here. You're trying to disguise exactly where your vehicles are, disguise where some of your troops are. That means that they're not so susceptible to things like RPGs that can't detect the vehicles. They're kind of line of sight getting shot at the vehicles, so you're more chance of missing if there's smoke everywhere, and then small arms fire as well. Anyway, these infantry fighting vehicles then do a runner and leave the guys to take over the trenches. Job done, so on and so forth. Right, I don't want to show anything inappropriate and whatnot, but there's a sense of a successful assault on trench lines. But you're having to use a mine clearing vehicle to throw up two lines of mine charges. It was fortuitously not targeted itself. It was able to do that safely, and then got out of the way. That's just one trench line in one tree line near one town, right? When you see the whole of the front line and you think, right, they need to now go and attack all the way down here. Look at how many fields there are that the Ukrainians have to get through. So this is where they've lost a bunch of equipment to south of Orikhiv and Malotokamachka, right? Every field they're having to lay mine charges and mine plows. They don't know what's been mined and what hasn't. So you've got to assume that every field has been mined. Like, okay, this is how far they've got, and we've already gone like 20 odd fields they've got to have completely cleared. Or how many mine clearing explosives? How many mine rollers will be used? And we've already seen a number that have been taken out by the defences. So it's going to take a massive amount of resources and effort and losses to clear the minefields of mines. And this is what I was saying before the counteroffensive. Don't underestimate the Russian defenses because minefields are a nightmare. Right, talking about, someone asked in one of my videos this morning, because I said they've only used 3 out of 35 brigades. Some some are saying more. Thomas Steiner says 4, and someone else says 6. But anyway, you get the point. They've used very few of what they could be using. So this goes to show that we're still in this early phase. It's not the proper counteroffensive, writ large or whatever. These are still these probing attacks to find weaknesses, and indeed they could be prolonging that phase so that the artillery, HIMARS, and Storm Shadows can wreak even more damage behind the Russian lines. Someone saying, I thought there were 12 brigades, not 35. Well, here's a count up. I have shared this with you before. Thomas Tyner was saying on the 20th, so this is 8 days ago, so more could have been used since then. 31st Mechanized, 37th Marine, 47th Mechanized, 128th Mountain Assault Brigades. There's still 2 tank brigades, 15 mechanized brigades, 1 Jaeger, 2 motorized, 1 Marine, 1 air assault, and 9 offensive guard brigades to go. There's still a lot in the tank as far as troop and mechanized equipment capacity. Now, just to let you know, what is a Jaeger? Jaeger infantry is a German military term used to denote light infantrymen whose civilian occupations, mostly hunters and foresters, this will be in times gone past, made them well suited to patrolling and skirmishing on an individual and independent basis rather than as part of a large scale military unit or traditional line infantry. As a consequence, Jaeger was used to describe skirmishers, scouts, sharpshooters, and runners. The word's usage and derivatives broadened over time. For instance, Feldjäger was the name given by the Prussian army to scouts and runners. Conversely, in the modern German army, Bundeswehr, Feldjäger is the name given to military police. Jäger is usually translated into English as rifleman, in an infantry role, or rifles in regimental names, and ranger, especially North American English. So the US used rangers as a military term. So as far as I understand, Jaeger, that means a light infantry unit or brigade or whatever. Okay, that is just a little bit on the topic of the counter-offensive. Let's look at some missiles. Ben Wallace, the UK Secretary of Defence, is talking about how significant Storm Shadows have been. They've been a game changer as far as I've argued. Quote, my understanding, or the quote is, my understanding is that the Storm Shadow missile has had a significant impact on the battlefield. Its accuracy and ability to deliver successfully the payload, as sent and designed by the Ukrainians, has been almost without fault. This is particularly significant given what's happened in Kramatorsk, right? Where you've got missiles being sent willy-nilly into cities. Now, there are trolls that apparently are saying that these were the Ukrainians doing this themselves. The Russian propagandists and TV stations have already said this was a successful strike by the Russians on, NATO command or whatever. They have admitted this was Russian, so this was definitely Russian, as according to Russians. They're claiming that this was a successful strike, except it clearly wasn't a successful strike unless taking out a pizza restaurant is indeed a successful strike rather than a war crime. But anyway, here, with what Ben Wallace is saying, you have Storm Shadow being almost without fault, which means that basically virtually every missile has hit exactly what it was intended to hit. That's the kind of success rate you want from your weapons, so that if you are having to do war, which is a horrible thing to do, and there will be collateral damage, you are minimizing the collateral damage by having precision. So why the US has worked so hard on getting precision guided munitions into their stocks rather than dumb munitions. Yeah, you're going to pay more to get pinpoint accuracy, but actually you'll use fewer things, right? You're not having to walk your artillery shells in, for example. You're hitting what you want, so you're not just throwing missiles randomly into a city. You're hitting your target. If you intend to hit that and you take it out, that's great. You're not having to send more than one missile at it or whatever. But as well, you're not having collateral damage. Now, the Russians might kind of not mind about collateral damage. It might even be a side objective. But actually, those kind of things can come back and bite you on the arse, and you might get some war crimes tribunals as a result. So, yeah, accuracy is super important, and I understand why the US are spending more money, R&D, and effort on getting accuracy, so that they can, do war better. Ukraine and Poland are negotiating over the purchase of a Polish coastal defense system equipped with naval strike missiles capable of hitting naval and land targets. The NSM has a range of about 250 kilometers or more than, and is one of the most advanced anti-ship missiles in the world. Right, this is significant. The UK has already provided Harpoon missiles. I think the UK has done this, and maybe I think there's a US though as well. United Kingdom, yeah. So we do have these. But anyway, nonetheless, these Harpoon missiles that they already have, and I think it was these or the Neptune missiles, which are their own indigenous ones, have a lower range, a smaller range, unless they are air launched. So basically 124 kilometers there for the normal ones, so on and so forth. So if you've got 250 kilometers, then that is really, really significant, because if we look at the Black Sea, we have Russian naval vessels uh, operating out of Sevastopol, but generally having to pull back further into the Black Sea to release their cruise missiles. Now, if you've got launch capability down this coast here that can hit to 250-kilometer range, then what does that mean for where the Russian fleet is? Well, let's just move. Oh, this makes things. Oh, do you know how significant that is? Really significant, because you can pretty much hit naval vessels as they're coming out of Sevastopol. They have to basically, if if it's more than 250, 250 plus, it's 300 kilometers to Sevastopol. Could you foresee these missiles being able to take out ships as they left the port or even in the port? That would be insane. So, but nonetheless, giving that kind of range is really significant. If you can, I think that's in. This is Romania. Yeah, that looks like Romanian language. Yeah, so I think the border comes around here. So imagine you get something set off from there. Can you get any closer? Yeah, it's still about 300 kilometers. So, yeah, but however, that is still significant, because suddenly you can't have Russian vessels in any of this area. You're having to really operate out of Novorossiysk and then keep them back here. And again, it's a really active deterrence, and you may see the end of the odd Russian vessel as well. So that is significant. Right, moving on to next subject, which is corruption. A couple of Chris Owicki threads. We'll start with this one. A retired Russian tank battalion commander has given a frank interview about the rampant corruption that he says has led to the complete collapse of the Russian army in the last 16 years. His comments highlight how the army has rotted from within during the Putin era. I just need to do a time check. Yeah. So, I've previously covered the Russian military's corruption problems at some length. See the nested threads below. But the interview of former Army Major Alexander Rozkov, a pseudonym, provides a rare and extensive personal insight into the problem. Rozkov, a St. Petersburger, served for 15 years and resigned from the army at the age of 36, shortly before the Ukraine war began. He says he decided that he did not want to, quote, degrade further in this system, and has since been avoiding mobilization orders. Rozkov blames many of the problems of the military reforms begun in the 2000s under then Defense Minister Anatoly Serdyukov. At the time, the mandatory length of service for conscripts was reduced from 2 years to 1 year. According to Roscoff, this was disastrous. Quote, when the Russian army began to serve for 1 year, we practically lost a whole chain of junior commanders, because with the 2 year service during the first year, the newcomers were taught some things related to technical specialities by the older servicemen. And when they switched to only a year of service, there was no one to teach them. Now a soldier can only learn to sweep in a year, and at best he'll take a couple of trips to the firing range. He'll hold an automatic rifle, and in a month he'll have forgotten how to do it. No one has even taught them anything close to military training. At the same time, officers and NCOs from the conscript army were selected to become professional contract soldiers, but Roskov says this was done in a disastrous way, leading to many unsuitable people becoming today's senior officers. There were telegrams from the top that it was necessary to select the best officers and the best non-commissioned officers who had 1 year of service left, and to send them to the training centres. But they began to send not the best officers, but the most lousy ones who had already annoyed everyone in the unit, and sergeants, the worst scoundrels. Well, there was mayhem and mass drunkenness in these centres. Nobody taught anybody anything. And from the outside, the contract servicemen were mostly from the edge of society, as a rule. Those who were unable to prove themselves in civilian life, alcoholics, parasites, and all sorts of scumbags. But in the army, you didn't have to do anything. You had to line up in the morning, wiggle your head, walk around, and you got your pay. And then they'd give you an apartment. I just decided to walk away from it all. It's absolutely fascinating insight. As a result of the corruption, he says, Russia's colonels and lieutenant colonels are largely useless. Roscoff says they would be in absolutely no demand in civilian life and are employed in the army as metaphorical barrier openers. Roscoff says that, quote, window dressing permeates the army at all levels, with units' readiness routinely faked for the benefit of senior officers. He was not surprised at the many complaints that have emerged of faulty and outdated equipment. So remember, I talked to you about Varanio, about how BS goes up the chain of command and everything's just a lie. These lies spread, and then people at the top eventually believe the reports and the lies that they're given, even though everyone below them knows that it's kind of a merry dance that they make around the truth. And all these kind of falsified reports get up to your commanders at the top, and Putin ends up making a decision like invade Ukraine based on a whole load of faulty information. Anyway, he continues. So you have 18 command and staff vehicles in your unit, and only 2 of them are operational. When the inspection comes, these 2 working vehicles move from one unit to another to be photographed, and a report is sent upstairs. We are fine, look, and this is everywhere. Roscoff is referring here to the widespread practice of photo reporting, faking readiness exercises, and even combat operations so that positive reports can be sent to senior leadership. This is where we saw Shoigu going around that manufacturing plant recently and seeing a bunch of trucks and tanks, and you're thinking, how many of those are actually working? They've had a paint job. Those are old-looking trucks for a start, and those tanks, are they photographed and then moved and photographed from a different angle? Can they actually be driven? You know, Shoigu was actually had his head under a bonnet picking up a cable. It was like, well, there you go. There's pretty good evidence that thing ain't driving. So it just feeds into this, doesn't it? Anton Igolkin, a graduate of the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, recalls how it worked in his conscript training a few years ago when he did his military training in his last year at the university. Quote, we were never taken to the firing range. Instead, we just took photos of ourselves with guns. Every morning started with a burst of patriotic spirit. It was quite funny because the Russian national anthem was played through an iPhone and played on an old Soviet loudspeaker. The unit commander drank every day. After the second bottle of vodka, he would crawl into his Land Cruiser and drive at breakneck speed around the compound. How he didn't hit anyone, it's a wonder. End quote. Tank training was also routinely faked. Crews are supposed to do a certain amount of hours in their tanks, but Roscoff says that this was faked by winding up the tanks to ensure the instruments showed the mandated amount of mileage, sort of thing you see in a dodgy garage where you get your mileage wound backwards. This time they're winding them up to show that they've actually done some driving. Quote, technically, it's not hard to do. The track shaft is removed from the chain links and the running tank simply stands still and runs idle. Subsequently, the perfect brand new equipment, which has never been driven anywhere, is simply written off and sent to a special base. End quote. Money for maintenance was routinely stolen, requiring junior officers to make so-called voluntary compulsory contributions from their own salaries to make up the shortfall, part of the phenomenon known as officer slavery. I mean, it's got its own term. Roscoff comments, quote, but no one, of course, came to the unit commander and said, Comrade Colonel, my barracks is not painted because there is no paint. And if someone did come, there was such a response that it's hard to call it an insult. I'm not going to reproduce it. In itinerary terms, the point was this: I don't even care how you do it, just do it, and that's it. Promotion is also subject to corruption, with officers obtaining seniority through bribes paid to the commander of the unit. Let's say, quote, let's say our turn to get a rank came up. but then there was no position available. So they call you up and say, look, there's a vacancy here, but you're not the only one applying for it. A silent auction begins between those who are more or less sane, who can write, read, and speak, and the highest bidder wins in the end. When I had to get a captaincy, they asked me to pay 150,000 rubles, that's $1,777 for the post of company commander. That was still inexpensive. It's absolutely insane. This is a really eye-opening account of the amount of corruption. Many officers compensate for their expenditure by extorting money from subordinates. Roscoff says that the platoon commanders, through their non-commissioned officers, forced conscripts to write letters home with requests to send remittances, which the officers then stole. Some company commanders objected to this practice and tried to stop it, but Roscoff says that the military investigating authorities did not care at all about what was happening and did nothing about it. Igolkin experienced this firsthand. Quote, I still remember frozen beef carcasses with the inkstand 1974 and poor conscripts with grey faces who went around begging for cigarettes from us, explaining that they will be beaten up by their grandfathers, older servicemen, and sergeants if they don't bring their smokes. And at the military department itself, they were already extorting bribes from us. Two colonels from Moscow who taught us blackmailed everyone that they would fail the final exam and forced us to contribute money. And when one of the students complained to the university's management, these soldiers didn't just apologize, they publicly threatened the guy who had complained. They asked him in public if he knew what it felt like to be squeezed out of a toothpaste tube. End quote. Another common scam is to charge subordinates to approve their leave. When Roscoff was serving, the bribe was 1,000 rubles, $12 a day. He says it's now 2,500 or $30 a day. On the front line in Ukraine, it's now reportedly as much as $1,188, 10,000. 100,000 rubles. Many Russian soldiers have complained before, and by the way, he gives further evidence of this, and I actually did that thread with you guys the other day to evidence those claims. Many Russian soldiers have complained before and during the war that they have been unable to get uniforms in the sizes they need. Mobilized men often ended up buying their own uniforms or outdoor clothes of some kind, at least from camping stores. In Igolkin's case, he recalls that the men at his training camp for conscripts were given only some mismatched shirts as uniforms. There were no boots at all, so they were allowed to wear their own shoes. Much of this is due to corrupt quartermasters who make extra money from selling military stores, as Roscoff notes. Quote, military jackets, for example, are gladly taken by fishermen engaged in winter fishing. They can buy such clothes for a whole fishing party of 10 to 15 people. End quote. Roscoff saw many other things being stolen from military stores, from uniforms to equipment to diesel fuel. In one spectacular example I reported on previously, thieves made off with a 72-ton prefabricated bunker. I mean, absolutely unbelievable. And he refers back to that May the 31st last year thread. Stolen clothing is written off as dead souls, fictitious soldiers who, Roscoff says, exist in every military unit. This is a scam which dates back to Tsarist times and was the focus of a famous novel by Gogol in 1842. Some dead souls, as Roscoff found, are very much alive. The scheme Roscoff describes is not complicated. An ex-soldier wanting some extra money negotiates a fictitious return to the army with the unit's commander or chief of staff. He's put back on the payroll as a dead soul and shares his salary with his uniformed sponsor. The dead soul doesn't do any actual military service. He only shows up at the unit during inspections so that the scam can keep going. The rest of his unit is, of course, fully aware of what is going on. Roscoff says Roscoff saw this firsthand in his unit. Quote, one day I came to the formation and I turned my head sideways. There are two warrant officers standing there and I see them for the first time. So I understood that the two of them were Armenians. Our commander was also an Armenian. I see that some people from the investigative committee are walking around, and I understood at once that they are the commander's dead souls. They come to me and ask if I know these people. Well, if I'm in the system, I am not going to set up the commander. I said that, yes, I see them every day, but I do not know them personally. Then the commander was prosecuted anyway, and after the trial, he was fined $500,000 That's $5,923 and dismissed. But when the dismissal documents were sent to Moscow in a special car, they simply did not get there. Probably the Armenian diaspora got involved, so he worked his way up to retirement. Then he wrote a report and left. Just absolutely incredible, isn't it? End quote. Some commanders come up with more creative ideas to make money on the side. In 2010, Roscoe says his regiment was doing tank training exercises in the Vladimir region. We went to the training area, he says, practiced riding and firing, and the regiment leadership had a genius idea. Why not make some money out of it? Some people found who were ready to pay for that ride on a tank and to shoot civilians, nothing to do with the army, a tank safari for the rich. And 2 conscripts got crushed to death as a result. The incident was hushed up. Roscoff is highly critical of the army's failure to provide its soldiers with modern equipment. Quote, I never saw any novelties there during the whole time of my service. I had a 1961 submachine gun, when I was at the college, then new armament started coming in, new in scare quotes, and the submachine gun was made in 1978. And after the Kalashnikov assault rifle, nothing else appeared in our army. We like to show off various forums and exhibitions at various forums and exhibitions. Look what a splendid plane we have. Well, we have just one. What an awesome automatic rifle we've made, yes, but we haven't put it into mass production to staff the army. Now, this is exactly what I was talking about with the Typhoon. I had that argument with a Russian troll who was saying, yeah, we've got an answer to HIMARS, and it can actually fire further. And like they do have it. Yeah, the Typhoon, Typhoon H, Typhoon S, uh, or Hurricane S, I think. Anyway, I'll have to look into that. Sorry, my memory is not so good as it should be. And I looked into it, and yeah, they have that. But is there any evidence of it being used? No, it doesn't seem to be put in mass production. There arguably is not enough ammunition for it, so on and so forth. And it's the same with the T-14 Armata, and we'll come on to that in a second. Having experienced war as a tank battalion commander in South Ossetia in 2008, when he suffered a wound from a landmine explosion, Roscoe is not keen to repeat the experience of going to the aid of a hostile population. Um, I remember very well how the local population there felt towards Russian soldiers. Many Ossetians told us openly that we were occupiers just as much as the Georgians. After a curfew, it was better not to show our faces on the street in uniform so as not to lose our heads. Roscoe is deeply skeptical of Putin's motives and has no desire to go to Ukraine. I just don't understand why I have to die for some Tsar who got bored at the age of 70, or maybe he got schizophrenic and decided to feel the Tamerlane to conquer something, to feel like Tamerlane and to conquer something. That is such a fascinating insight into the world of corruption concerning the Russians. And there is just this is a much shorter one, but again, it talks to corruption in the Russian army as well. So, an ongoing corruption scandal over the construction in 2014 of Russia's National Defense Control Center appears to have reached the senior leadership of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Deputy Defense Minister Ruslan Salikov has reportedly been questioned by investigators. I almost reported this morning, actually, but moved it to here. This is, I think, the Swiss new control center they've got that they spent gazillions on, and I've reported on it before, another Kramatorsk thread then. The Russian Telegram channel that Kramatorsk often sources or uses as a source reports that, according to a source, Salikov was detained and questioned on the 26th of June over new allegations of embezzlement of funds during a 40 billion ruble, $500 million construction of the NDCC in Moscow. The NDCC was a flagship project for Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, but it suffered huge cost overruns. The Telegram channel blames this on the MOD paying several times the market value for the construction and fitting of the facility. And then he talks about the thread that I previously showed you and talked you through, talking about the overrun of that facility and how much it ended up costing. Major military projects are a magnet for corruption in Russia due to a lack of transparency and the systemic nature of graft among officials and contractors. Salikov, in particular, has been the focus of suspicions for a long time. An investigation by Alexei Navalny's team has found that Salikov's family owns property worth 4.3 billion rubles. That's $50.5 million. He owns a $41 million house in the luxury suburb of Rubliovka. His children, who have no recorded income, own another $9.5 million worth of property in Moscow. Just follow the money. It's like Putin. If Putin's the richest man in the world, and you look at his mistresses and wives and children and whatever, and they have gazillions of dollars and are spending money like bonkers and have all of these properties and businesses and whatever, you're like, where have you got that money from? Who's your dad? Oh, Putin. Where's he got the money from? Oh, corruption, kleptocracy. Yeah, that's it. So it's follow the money. And, if his family have no jobs and a shed load of money, that money is coming from the Russian state. It's just one big corrupt cesspit. Investigators appear to be following a chain of corruption up from former Major General Vyacheslav Lobuzko, who was arrested over the corruption of Russia's space forces, which has reportedly crippled its early warning radar systems. I talked to you through this thread previously, the early warning radar systems that are just not functional due to, hey, you guessed it, massive corruption. Lubuzko also oversaw the construction of the NDCC and as such would almost certainly know who got payoffs. The Telegram channel has previously suggested that Major General Oleg Stepanov, head of the MOD's Department of Military Representation, and former Deputy Minister of Defense Mikhail Mzintsev, who formerly headed the NDCC, would come under scrutiny. I think that latter one there is the Wagner's number 2 now. Is that not right? It's unlikely that senior officials would have embezzled without cover from the top, so it was always likely that ministers would also be implicated. As it was also Shoigu's pet project, the investigation may not end with Salikov, who is one of Shoigu's long-time allies. Just, absolutely insane. I had much more to talk through with you, but I'm going to have to leaving my hungry section for the next video. I just want to show you this. This is talking about corruption and Russian misinformation. The T-14 Armata. I'm not going to show you this whole video, but this is talking. This is from a Twitter handle called Russian Embassy SWE. It's a Swedish parody account. And it's a hilarious video. Someone's taken the time to make this video of the T-14 Armata doing its thing, right? I'm going to turn this sound off. So here we have the T-14 Armata just taking out aircraft and then coming down and just being basically invincible, coming up, taking out every single tank it comes across with its laser. And anyway, this video just goes on for 2 minutes. It's just well worth looking at as it just destroys everything in sight. And then it even goes to the Navy, even takes out Iron Man as the helicopter blades come out and it destroys all the best kit that you can see. Anyway, it's rather amusing. And if you've got 3 minutes of your day where you want a little bit of a laugh, go and check this out. It is worth it. We'll just see him take out some of these naval ships and then the submarine. The T-14, I mean, it's a really good laser pig video that I've shown you before, or giving you the link of before, that is really good at showing you actually how rubbish the T-14 is. Some people say there are some incorrect claims on there. It's not quite as bad as people claim, but it is pretty rubbish. Considering what it should be. Anyway, there you go. Iron Man comes along, gets involved. There you go. The last thing that I will say before I go is concerning trolls. And as What's Not Stinky on my threads said, they are on a national Trolliday. I like that. I'm going to use that. It's really fascinating that I have not seen any trolls for 2 days now on any of my threads. Correct me if I'm wrong. But also, people have been saying they've been hanging out at DPA, Defense Politics Asia. New War Economics and Weeb Union, New World Economics War Reports, NWU War Reports, and Weeb Union, and have seen a distinct lack of trolls there as well. It's fascinating that they appear to not be working. Literally, it just goes to show that they are paid up trolls. And when I've said to you before about interference in politics, and some of you get up in arms, oh, you can't talk about interference in US politics as if like it didn't happen. And it has happened. It's happened in UK politics. These paid up trolls, right? They don't just do stuff to do with war. They don't just come and troll on war reporting, Ukraine war reporting. They're involved in all sorts of forums all over the internet, and they are paid to do so. And here's a really good bit of evidence to suggest they are paid because for some reason they're all not there today. Whether it's because Prigozhin's big old troll farm. Is it St. Petersburg troll farm that he's got? I've did a section on that in one of my videos, or I did a whole video actually, I think, on trolls and bots and his famous troll farm employing lots of people to do that. It might be that suddenly with Prigozhin going to Belarus, that everything that he does is under investigation and they've been shut down for a couple of days. Suddenly you don't have trolls on the forums. But just watch out because they will be doing this on political forums as well. So when it comes up to your next election, whatever country you live in, I mean, we know it's happened in the UK and in the US for sure. There's evidence of that. You know, Twitter and Facebook have admitted that and submitted data about that. Right? We know it's happening. They do interfere because what they do in trying to steer the conversations here, of course, they're doing it in political conversations. And to think they're not doing that is ridiculous. Now, that is interference. If you're having paid up members of another country being paid to go online and spread disinformation about political leaders or parties in your country, that is interference in the free and fair democratic elections of a country. That's what they do. And they do it in these war videos. They do it on my videos. I have first-hand experience of them doing this on my channel, but I also have first-hand experience of that in the political sphere in other forums out there. I have come across bots who are spreading political disinformation. And so it's something, how do we deal with that? Well, actually, we know it's a big problem because Defense Secretary Ben Wallace has, I think they produced a big report. Ukraine, the latest, did a section of their podcast on this, an interview with Ben Wallace. He's got a task force, I think, looking into this sort of disinformation and trying fighting on the fifth generation kind of battlefront. Uh, the fighting over hearts and minds and narratives and information. This is a massive challenge. So another thing to come out of this war in Ukraine is the importance that Russia, for example, put on their information warfare, the amount of effort they put into that. But it won't just be Russia; it'll be China. I hear rumors that China are now in that game too. So just be warned. Think is the information that I'm being given might sound good because I want to believe that because it's according with my own political beliefs. So it might be this person is attacking my enemy, my political enemies in my own country. So yeah, but is it actually true? Is this information being fed to me, being fed to me by a nefarious foreign entity that's doing insidious narrative manipulation? Just be warned. It's something we're going to have to spend a lot of time and effort fighting it going forward. Anyway, thanks so much for your support. You take care, everybody. Really appreciate all of you, especially in the absence of the trolls today. Literally all of you now. All of you are great. Don't tell them when they come back that I said you're all great. Take care. Speak soon.